And I want to start with going back to what Upshaw said when Lanier declined to take the ball when he won that coin flip. Upshaw's interpretation was, and what he said was, we've just been insulted, right? That was his takeaway. Well, unfortunately, when I talk of we, I'm talking about Americans in general and business owners and consumers and taxpayers and workers. We've all been insulted by the current administration. And worse than being insulted, we've got a situation that is frankly disturbing to the point where it's bordering on maddening. And let me walk you through it, even though you may struggle to believe as you hear some of this, that these are things that our government is actually doing on behalf of its citizens, at least theoretically. So first, there's this U.S. law that was passed late last year, and the title of the law is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which requires U.S. importers of goods from Xinjiang, China, to demonstrate that the goods were not made with slave labor. And of course, that's a huge problem with millions of imprisoned Muslims in what's Xinjiang province. And although the Chinese say it's nothing more than re-education, right, or at re-education camps, we know that it's a very different truth. So that law has a great intention, right? Who can be against what that law is trying to achieve? And a little supply chain transparency is not going to hurt anybody these days, especially for businesses who are trumpeting their sustainability credibility day after day. Now, the second point to consider, to put out there, what's going on with this mad dash to renewable energy in the United States, and particularly with solar, because the stuff to make solar panels does not exist at the scale needed here in the United States. We need to have that stuff mined, processed, and manufactured over there. And over there as in places like China. So China is the world's largest manufacturer of solar panels, and that's by a very wide and large margin. And the feedstock for these panels is polysilicon, of which China controls 80% of the global capacity for. So effectively, China holds a global monopoly on the crucial feedstock for solar panels. Now, the third point to consider into the analysis, guess where much of that polysilicon is found and made in China? That's right, in Xinjiang province. And do you think there might be some slave labor involved in that endeavor? Would that be a possibility? And then there is the fourth point to consider, that being the reality that China views solar panel manufacturing and all the upstream activity that goes with it, like polysilicon production, as a strategic industry or set of industries. It grows those industries, China does, it cuts prices on those products, and it swamps the supply of things like solar panels, whereby Western economies and competitors, well, they can't compete, and they can't make the solar panels themselves. So the U.S. government, right, decides to slap tariffs on Chinese solar panel imports for what we say is unfair trade practices. And the U.S. is trying to raise their costs of the Chinese solar panel imports and is trying to protect the market for the higher cost domestic solar panel producers. It's trade protectionism, essentially, which is quite ironic considering the same administration, right, won't let or allow domestic oil and natural gas to compete on their own. So maybe that's not just ironic, but also inconsistent policy bordering on the silly or insane as well. Anyway, the next point to consider. China figures a way around the U.S. tariffs on its solar panels by sending through the panels or partially making them, finishing them in close-by nations in Asia like Vietnam. So that's how they're getting around these tariffs on solar panel imports. But then the U.S. Commerce Department begins to investigate these solar imports from those nations when domestic solar panel manufacturers, they start to complain about this. Now, what gets interesting is when all of these points come together. We have all of these U.S. government intentions and desires colliding and conflicting into a massive, incoherent, and illogical mess, particularly when it meets the real world with inflation and Ukraine and energy demand and everything else. So let's play this out. On one hand, we say no slave labor built goods, and if you can't disclose that supply chain transparency, you can't import the Chinese goods under the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Then we say it's code red for humanity with climate Armageddon approaching, and we must plow trillions of dollars into subsidizing and paying for high cost and inefficient solar, all while ignoring its Scope 3 carbon dioxide emissions, which is ironic because lowering CO2 emissions was the underlying reason we wanted to run to things like solar to begin with. But then we see China is making these solar panels cheaper than we can and is spitting out much more of them, so we slap tariffs on Chinese panels to protect domestic producers of solar panels. But then China works around that tariff by sending the solar panels first to intermediate nations in Asia so they can look on paper as if they didn't come from China, but everybody knows and sees it for what that is. But then domestic producers can't even come close to making enough solar panels to meet all these subsidized energy policy targets for solar. And the administration panics because it's starting to expose the flaw of these energy policies when inflation starts to rage across our economy. So the U.S. government waives for 2 years tariffs on solar panels coming from Asian countries close by China, the same Asian countries like Vietnam, who we all know are being used to front for the real manufacturer of those solar panels, which is China, which means we effectively waive the tariffs on the Chinese solar manufacturers that we originally slapped on them. Then all this protectionism and subsidy of solar, it drives up the global prices for things like polysilicon to an 11-year high, of which China controls 80% of the supply. Our balance of trade suffers, China's balance of trade benefits. Our energy security erodes, and China and Russia's energy leverage increases. Our consumers and our business owners and our taxpayers and the climate and the middle class, they all suffer. So who wins in this mess? Well, the bureaucrat, because the system or the government grows without accountability. The subsidy-seeking, rent-seeking corporation that built a business model to feed off of all this as a beneficiary. And of course, our global adversaries. Now, when academics and books speak about the suicide of the West, you've heard that term before, the suicide of the West, this might be the exact situation that comes to epitomize the method of suicide utilized. It's self-inflicted economic death by energy policy.